Introduction: when agency exists, even without a written agreement. In the previous section, we explored how agency relationships are created through express agreements, implied agreements, and agency documentation. However, in real estate practice, there are situations where an agency relationship may arise even when the parties did not formally intend to create one. Courts sometimes recognize agency relationships through legal doctrines such as ratification and estoppel. These doctrines exist to protect consumers when the behavior of a real estate professional creates the appearance of representation. When an agent acts in a way that leads a consumer to reasonably believe they are being represented, fiduciary duties may arise even if the agent never intended to create an agency relationship. This is why it is critical for real estate professionals to clearly define representation early in the transaction process. Misunderstandings about agency relationships are one of the most common causes of regulatory complaints and civil disputes. Understanding ratification and estoppel helps agents recognize situations where agency could unintentionally form and helps them implement practices that reduce risk. A. Agreement by ratification. Ratification occurs when a principal approves or accepts the actions of an agent after those actions have already taken place. In agency law, ratification means that a person confirms or adopts the actions of another person who acted on their behalf, even if the agent did not originally have authority to act. Once ratification occurs, the agency relationship is treated as if it existed from the beginning. In real estate practice, ratification can occur when a client accepts the benefits of an agent's actions after the fact. For example, imagine a real estate agent in Mesa who submits an offer on behalf of a buyer before the buyer has signed a buyer representation agreement. If the buyer later accepts the terms of the offer and proceeds with the transaction, the buyer may be considered to have ratified the agent's actions. By accepting the benefits of the agent's efforts, the buyer effectively confirms that the agent was acting on their behalf. Ratification can create legal obligations and fiduciary duties even if a formal agreement was not initially in place. Because of this risk, real estate professionals should ensure that agency relationships are clearly established through written agreements before acting on behalf of clients. B. Estoppel. The doctrine of estoppel prevents a person from denying a relationship or fact when their actions have caused another party to reasonably rely on that relationship. In real estate agency law, estoppel can occur when a real estate professional behaves in a way that leads a consumer to believe the agent is representing them, even though no formal agreement exists. If the consumer relies on that belief and suffers harm as a result, the agent may be prevented from denying that an agency relationship existed. For example, consider a buyer attending several showings with an agent in Scottsdale. The agent provides advice about pricing strategies, negotiates with listing agents, and suggests specific offer terms. If the buyer reasonably believes the agent is acting as their representative and relies on the agent's advice, a court could determine that an agency relationship exists through estoppel. This situation can create legal liability for the agent if the buyer later claims that the agent failed to protect their interests during the transaction. Estoppel emphasizes the importance of clearly defining agency relationships early in the client interaction process. C. Unintentional agency. Unintentional agency occurs when an agency relationship forms without the agent deliberately creating it. This often happens when an agent provides services that appear to represent the interests of a consumer without clarifying the nature of the relationship. For example, a real estate professional may believe they are simply providing general information to a prospective buyer, but the buyer may interpret the agent's actions as representation. If the agent begins advising the buyer on negotiation strategies or recommends how much to offer on a property, the buyer may reasonably believe that the agent is acting as their agent. In the Phoenix metropolitan area, this situation often occurs during open houses. A buyer may attend an open house in Gilbert and ask the hosting agent for advice about writing an offer. If the agent provides detailed guidance about negotiation strategies without clarifying that they represent the seller, the buyer may later claim that the agent was acting as their representative. Unintentional agency relationships create legal risk because fiduciary duties may arise even though the agent did not intend to represent the buyer. To prevent this problem, agents should clearly explain their role and representation status when interacting with consumers. D. Legal hotline case scenarios. Legal hotlines frequently receive questions related to agency misunderstandings. Many of these situations involve agents unintentionally creating agency relationships through their actions or communications. Reviewing these scenarios helps agents understand how agency law applies to real-world transactions. One common scenario involves a buyer who repeatedly contacts a listing agent for advice about negotiating a purchase. If the listing agent provides detailed negotiation guidance instead of recommending that the buyer obtain independent representation, the buyer may later argue that the listing agent was acting as their agent. Another common scenario occurs when agents share confidential information learned during listing presentations with potential buyers. If the agent reveals information about the seller's motivation or urgency to sell, the seller may claim that the agent violated fiduciary duties. Legal hotline guidance typically emphasizes the importance of documenting agency relationships and clarifying representation early in the transaction. By clearly explaining who the agent represents and documenting agency agreements in writing, licensees can avoid many of the misunderstandings that lead to complaints or litigation. Discussion. Questions. How can ratification create an agency relationship even when no written agreement was signed initially? Answer. Ratification occurs when a client accepts the benefits of an agent's actions after the fact, confirming that the agent was acting on their behalf. Why can the doctrine of estoppel create liability for a real estate professional? Answer. Because if an agent's behavior causes a consumer to reasonably believe they are being represented, the agent may be prevented from denying the agency relationship. What steps can real estate agents take to prevent unintentional agency relationships from forming? Answer. Agents should clearly explain who they represent, avoid giving negotiation advice to unrepresented parties, and document agency relationships through written agreements.